Isn't the Catholic Church arrogant to say it's the only path to God? And do Catholics have to abstain from meat every Friday? Today on Free Range Q&A with Al Cresta. Welcome to this episode of Free Range Q&A. I'm Nick Tom, along with Al Cresta, who is going to answer your questions that you have submitted on Facebook, Twitter, and at freerange@avemariaradio.net. That's freerange@avemariaradio.net. The show is always better the more questions that we get. Ready to go?
A little disappointed. This thing's still here.
I haven't completed my eating yet. See, I still got... Yeah.
It's a disgrace.
It's chicken.
It's a disgrace.
And yes, I'm eating it right in front of Bob.
The chicken will have its revenge. Okay.
First question from Mike. He emailed, I have found that the common question that people ask who don't believe is about the church's arrogance. From my own experience with a couple of sons who fell away from the church, it's along the lines of, why is the church so arrogant as to insist it shows it's the only way to God? To them, this appears to be insensitive and self-righteous. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, Mike, it would be arrogant if, in fact, we were saying Jesus is the only way because he's my way. That would be arrogant. Or if we were saying Jesus is the only way because I have superior insight into reality or something. The problem here is that the proclamation that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but by him, is first made not by the apostles or by me or you or the church. It's first made by Jesus himself. And that's why we have this idea that there's no one under heaven or earth by which human beings can be saved. That was the proclamation of the apostles, but it was based on Jesus' own self-identification. So here we have the man who is the victor over death telling us that he is the way, the truth, and the life. You know, Socrates asked, what is truth? And Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths. Muhammad claimed that an angel told him to recite the truth. Moses said he had the truth in 2 stone tablets. But it's only Jesus of Nazareth that dares to say, I am the truth. Most religions are built on theological propositions or philosophical ideologies. It's only Christianity that is built on the identity of its founder. And if you take a look at the Gospels, the identity of Jesus is kind of the mystery plot, you know, through the books. In Matthew 16, for instance, Jesus asks the apostles, who do men say that I am? In other words, what is my identity? And Peter steps forward and says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And he gets it right. And for getting it right, Jesus then gives Peter the keys to the kingdom, the powers of binding and loosing, and says, upon this rock, that is the confessing Peter, I will build my church. So this idea of the identity of Jesus is central to Christianity. You know, Pilate wants to know who he is. Herod wants to know who he is. Everybody wants to know who he is. And he is the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through him. Now, I don't think this is as arrogant as it sounds. It's the responsibility of a bride to be faithful to her bridegroom. Nobody thinks that a bride is arrogant by saying that her bridegroom is the bridegroom to whom she must be faithful to. Well, the church is the bride, and Jesus is the bridegroom. And what we're doing when we say that he is the way, the truth, and the life is we're simply showing fidelity to him. We're obligated to do that. Again, not just because we like him, but because our relationship with him is based on his identity. And for us not to bear that identity is to be unfaithful. There's so much more that could be said about this. But reality is a lot more narrow than we think it is. The formula for penicillin requires to be followed. Learning to ride a bike requires you to follow certain things. Salvation requires that certain conditions be met. Reality is sometimes very narrow, and that's why Jesus says that the way is narrow that leads to life, and few find it. The way is broad that leads to destruction, and many go there. So I'm sorry about your sons, but it is unfortunately a fact of life, a reality here, that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by him. And that's because he said it, not because the church says it, not because I say it.
This is a good thing to think through before we enter the holiday season, when we're gathering with family and friends, and for a lot of people this type of question is going to come up.
Yeah, it's a problem of people mistake the church's fidelity to Christ with arrogance, because they think it's an arbitrary imposition of the church. It's not. It's the church fulfilling its wedding vows to Christ.
Next question is from Kathleen in Ypsilanti, Michigan. I was recently informed that the requirement to abstain from meat on Friday is still in force all year long. I have for years thought it was changed to only during Lent, and if you search on the internet for answers, most sites do say only during Lent, but you can substitute some other devotion if you choose to not abstain from meat. Are hordes of Catholics committing mortal sins on Friday? I'm confused.
Well, it's not a surprise that you're confused. Again, I've said it time and again, there's been a catastrophic collapse of catechesis, and so Catholics in America are, in many ways, ignorant of what the Church itself teaches. So that's what Catholic Radio exists. It exists to do what you're asking for, and that is do remedial catechesis here. Let's go to and find out what the Church does teach on this, because it's not that difficult to understand. If you go to the 1983 Code of Canon Law, which is the universal law of the Latin Church, Canon 1251 reads, "Abstinence from eating meat or some other food according to the prescripts of the Conference of Bishops is to be observed on all Fridays, unless a solemnity should fall on a Friday. Abstinence and fasting are to be observed on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday." However, you'd think that's simple enough, but you just go down to Canon 1253, and we read, "The Conference of Bishops can determine more precisely the observance of fast and abstinence, as well as substitute other forms of penance, especially works of charity and exercises of piety, in whole or in part." So what has happened is the U.S. bishops have, in fact, released a further development of this in response to Canon 1251, which is the universal obligation to abstain from meat on Fridays. The bishops, though, have written a document called On Penance and Abstinence. You've got to distinguish between the language of exhortation and the language of legislation. And through this document, the bishops are bending over backwards not to give the impression that there's no need for penance on Friday. In fact, let me read this here. "Friday itself remains a special day of penitential observance throughout the year, a time when those who seek perfection will be mindful of their personal sins and the sins of mankind they are called upon to help expiate in union with Christ crucified. Among the works of voluntary self-denial and personal penance, which we especially commend to our people for the future observance of Friday, even though we hereby terminate the traditional law of abstinence as binding under pain of sin, as the sole prescribed means of observing Friday, we give first place to abstinence from flesh meat. We do so in the hope that the Catholic community will ordinarily continue to abstain from meat by free choice, as formerly we did in obedience to church law."
Oh, that's crystal clear.
What they're doing is they would like you to continue abstaining from meat on Fridays, but they have not made it a legal obligation. They exhort you, they urge you, but they don't command you under penalty of sin. So again, Fridays are a traditional day of penance. It's expected that we will engage in penance. And in the 1966 document, it was expected that Catholics would continue to abstain from meat, but it wasn't given to us as a formal piece of legislation, a law that we had to obey under pain of sin. So
in other words, I can eat Bob here on a Friday if I so choose.
If you do that, you'll have penance to pay, though, because I'm sticking up for Bob as one of our creatures that needs defense. But
we'll see about that.
It is a traditional day of penance, and the bishops would like you to abstain. Bob.
We'll see.
Okay.
Thank you for your participation in today's program. We want you to participate next week. Email your questions to freerange@avemariaradio.net. That's freerange@avemariaradio.net.
I do have a question, by the way.
Oh boy.
Have you heard about Pope Francis counseling a Lutheran woman that it's a matter of conscience for her whether or not she will receive communion? Now, I'm giving you the popular way it's being reported. I'd like to know if you've heard about this and if it's something we should deal with. So let us know.
Touchy topic. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you next time here on Free Range Q&A with Al Cresta.
Personal sins and the sins of mankind. And the